Obviously you're in the US at the moment, so you know, street cred to you for being, what is it, 10 p.m. your time?
Yeah, 10 p.m. But who's really, counting at this point?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, work is fun, isn't it? Or it certainly can be if you have the right attitude to it. So you and I first came across each other on, I think I saw a LinkedIn post of yours, and it really, really struck a chord with me because there are so many people now trying to use inbound techniques and find their work. I use them, you probably use them too. But you were talking about the successes, incredible successes you've had in your own business over the years, and recently picking up the phone and some people call it old school. I call it new school. So I thought I've got to get you on the show. When we first spoke, it was the thing that struck me was your voice. And I think in telesales, in recruitment sales, in speaking to people, you've got to have that likable tone of voice and so on. So as I say, great to have you on the show. But tell our audience a little bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, Mike, and really appreciate you for having me on here. For those that don't know me, I run a recruitment company called Jay's Great Consulting and Recruiting. For the past 3 years, we primarily focus a lot on placing sales representatives. It's really just happened by accident. I spent for the past, I would say, decade of my life just in sales, director of sales, sales management. Another Grant Cardone. It just so happened when I left, a lot of the people that we were training said, hey, do you want to come work for me? And I said, why don't I just find you someone else instead? And that's how this whole business started. But, when it comes to sales, when it comes to what I like to call the gift of gab, what I've been told as a young lad when I started this whole sales career, everybody's just told me, oh, you have the gift of gab. You have the gift of gab. You're likable. You're presentable. Whether you're just easy to talk to you. And those is one of the many qualities that I possess over my tenure of being in sales. And at the end of the day, I became a student of the process, right? Like anybody else, when they start, they're looking to learn as much as possible. And for me, I became a lifelong student of the game. So I'm excited to have this conversation to you today, especially about, picking up the phone and mixing a little bit of old school with new school, because I think it's a combination of both that drives success when it comes to hitting recruitment businesses, really.
Yeah, I love that. And, that word student, there's a myth for me in most industries. I've been trained. It's total nonsense. It's a lifelong journey of improvement, isn't it? So, I've created 800 videos now, recruitment sales training videos. And I'm on YouTube and I'm learning from sales gurus. I mean, why not? There's always a little technique somewhere that you think, oh, wow, I could use that. Even when I'm listening to call recordings, and I've listened to hundreds of them, I pick up little things, the way that the phraseology, the timing of the interjection and so on. So I love that word, student. So let's kick off with a few questions now. In your experience of training people, coaching them, interviewing salespeople, what would you say are the biggest mistakes that you see people making when they're making a sales call, cold or otherwise?
Yeah, so let's just talk about cold, because that's how primarily we're generating our book of business. And I think that's a fun topic for a lot of recruiters when they're talking about reaching out to new business. Cold, it could be quite scary when you don't know what to do. But I think the most important thing is that when you're reaching, most just don't understand the formula. And you have to really understand the formula in order for you to be successful. So a lot of times people ask, like, Jay's like, what's the formula for cold calling, right? It's the moment you pick up the formula. Before you even pick up, you just have to know you have to agree with everybody. You have to make them right. And you just got to learn how to throw your hooks. And when I say hooks, I mean sales hooks, not an actual hook, like if you're fishing. And that's how you're going to start grabbing attention. And if you really understand what a sales hook is, it's really a conversation starter that piques somebody's interest into wanting to know more. Think of it like an elevator pitch. But when you understand that, it becomes easy, because it doesn't matter the industry you're in. It doesn't matter if it's scripted or not. It just flows. And once you do it a couple of times, a few more times, and you start being repetitive with it every day, like all of a sudden it becomes natural. And that's what you want it to become. It's to become natural. And most never get to that point because they don't understand the formula. They don't understand the amount of practice or effort goes into learning the skill. And most quit before they even get started.
Totally agree with you. And then they blame, that client is difficult. The client's not nice to me, or some other spurious excuse. Whereas the very best people are learning from failure. I mean, I love that Michael Jordan quote, failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of it. And we fail every day. And that's okay, isn't it? Provided you're taking something away from, whatever element of failure it is. But, you're talking about the consistency there, Jace. The 10,000 hour rule, which was popularized by Michael Gladwell, talks about it takes 10,000 hours of practice to achieve world-class status in any field. There's a great book called Bounce by Matthew Said, and it goes into evidence that sits around that. But there's also something I came across recently called the Rule of 100. It's kind of based upon the Gladwell principle. And people say that if you put in 100 hours, which actually is only 18 minutes a day for 12 months, then you become better than 95% of the population. So, 100 hours of solid commitment, doing the things that you've just advised, surely that's a no-brainer to do that, isn't it? As opposed to giving in when you've had failure.
It definitely is, but I'm the type of person, I always like to condense time. I always like to circumvent time, right? How can I get from point A to point B as fast as humanly possible? And when I'm thinking about that Gladwell rule, the one thing that comes to mind is how can I get 100 hours in a month, in a week, as much as concise as possible, so I can see the success with that person. So like, let's think about this for a moment. Let's say you're on a cold call. And what does everybody say when they're on a cold call, right? They do about 50 to about 100 calls per day. Let's just use that basic math. If you do about, let's say 100 a day, that's 500 a week, 500 a week. By 500 a week by a month, you're at 2,000 times 10 months, you're going to be at what? 20,000. So if you follow that rule of thumb, it's going to take you, 10 months, if not longer, for you to pop when it comes to this whole process of just picking up the phones and excelling through that process. But if you're able to figure out a way to get 500 cold calls in a day, right? Let's using that Maxwell rule. How can you condense time faster in order for you to accelerate that growth quicker? Then all of a sudden you condense a week into a day and that month into a week. And now all of a sudden that 2 months, 3 months, you'll see the pop time faster than what it would take you 6 months, 8 months or faster. And that's how you're able to accelerate the growth, especially when it comes to learning a new skill, which most, like you were talking about earlier, they never get to that point in time. And that's how I think if you're able to, how can we concise everything to get to your destination quicker? And I think that's kind of a flaw that sometimes we fail to see as we're growing a business. How can we get there quicker? And I just think when I think about it, I think it's mind blowing the type of theories that I come up with. And I think there's tools out there nowadays that could get you to that place and skill sets where you can really accelerate your learning as fast as humanly possible.
Yes. Again, love that. I'm referring to the rule of 100 there. You're condensing that into a much shorter period than 12 months. You're probably moving towards the 10,000 hours, never mind the 100, which is proven to be a model where you become one of the best in the world. But linked into this, I'm sure there's people on this session now who are thinking, but I can't get hold of direct phone numbers anymore. So that complaint, there are tools like Lusher or Apollo or Signal Hire and others. But what advice would you give to the people who complain, well, I can't get a phone number, I can't get through to them?
You got excuses or you got results. You can't have both. What do you want me to say? Like I went through that too. I went through the whole process and I said, you know what, let me just learn it. Let me learn how to do this, and then let me give it to someone so then they could accelerate it. Don't get me wrong. All these tools that you mentioned are fantastic. They're great, but their accuracy is going to be the biggest issue when you are trying to get in front of the right person. I found out that if you learn how to do this yourself, your accuracy, and you take the time to doing it, you could get a much higher accuracy. Our accuracy right now on cold calls, they're between 66 to about 69%, which is a lot higher than the Zoom Infos, the Apollos, the Seamless, the Lucias of the world, because at the end of the day, they're storing a data bank, right? So it's not up to date. What we do is we've been able to figure out how to scrape, enrich, validate data in real time every single month, so we could get in front of the right person every single month, leading to a higher connection rate, conversation rate, and appointment rate. And I know those KPIs now like the back of my hand. So if we bring someone on, like within the first 2 months, in terms of just picking up the phone and calling, in order for us to know their pop time, which is, back to that Gladwell rule, is 10,000 hours. But in cold calling, the pop time there is from 15,000 to 25,000 cold calls, right? That's where we see the pop time. So if you do the math of 100 a day, it's going to take you about a whole year, maybe a year and maybe 15 months. But if you follow the concise plans of 500 in a day to 500 cold calls in a day, you'll get there in 4 months, 5 months, 6 months time. And then all of a sudden they start popping. And that's when you start getting the person making 10, 15, 20 appointments every single month per person. It's scalable. And I know you're going to be a fan of that, because now when we put someone in front of you, what are going to be the most common objections they're going to be telling you, Mike? What are the most common ones we hear all the time?
Yeah, I'm not recruiting. I'm happy with my current suppliers. We've got internal recruiters. We've got a preferred supplier agreement, things of that nature.
So let's just say out of the 15 or 20 appointments you made, 50% goes out the window, because those are the most common things you'll hear. But you still have another 7 opportunities. And if each opportunity, let's just say we could lowball it and say it's just $10,000, that's $70,000 in contracts. Worst case scenario, lowballing it, that you could potentially make off of just cold calling. Where else can you get a better cost of acquisition?
Yeah. I think there's people have a mindset now that it's old fashioned, which is complete nonsense. You could read a sales book from Dale Carnegie, say, when did he write books? What, from the 1930s, maybe, somewhere around that era?
Something like that, yeah.
And yet there is still gold in some of those books. For me, it doesn't matter if the technique is brand new today or if it's from 50 years ago, provided it's still relevant and you can use it. And I think having the right mindset is key. And what I'm hearing from you there is a lot of mindset. It's find the numbers, don't make the excuses. I mean, little things that I've done. If I couldn't get through to someone, I tried. I was creative, and I couldn't get a phone number, and I couldn't get through. I'd try different avenues. Now, one of the old-fashioned ones was, call the finance department. Can I speak? I'm calling about blah blah blah. Oh, he doesn't work in this department. And sorry to trouble you. You don't happen to have a direct line for him, do you? Now, that technique can work sometimes. Another one that I tried occasionally was to send a Hotmail email out of office hours to the target. So I'd get hold of an email address somehow, or I'd guess the format of the email. And occasionally it would bounce back with an out of office hours with a mobile phone number on the email signature. Now, the problem with that technique is it hit and miss. So therefore you try it and it doesn't work, and therefore people give in. But if you're really, really hungry and you really want to get through to that decision maker, why would you not make the extra effort? I mean, of course, you can get referrals from people who know that person, and you can, get into their little black book, so to speak, and get contact numbers. So as you say, there are lots of ways to do that. Let's move on to tone and fluency. We touched on it a little bit at the start, Jace, but the people you've hired or people you've worked with, what advice would you give to people who don't quite have that likability voice, where their tone isn't quite right, they speak maybe too quickly, they're not as articulate as they could be? How could you get people to improve in that area?
I think that just comes with time and training. At the end of the day, I got to this point because I went through so much rigorous training back then. If you have someone, if at the end of the day, recruiting is sales, right? Recruiting is sales, no matter how you want to skin the cat. If you can learn from someone you like, at the end of the day, it's like learn from someone that you resonate with. Don't try to be them, try to be yourself. When I went through this whole, training, I went through Jeb Blunt, I went through Mike Amarino, I went through Grant Cardone, who I ended up working with. Even the Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, ended up training, like just going through all this training. At the end of the day, none of what they told me resonated with me, but I was learning their tactics and I was learning their strategies, and I was putting things into my plate that I felt like me. And that's the most important thing, is just be yourself. As cliche as that sounds, at the end of the day, they're buying from you because they like you, know you, and trust you. And if you could put all that in a basket and share with them information that makes valid sense for them to move forward with you, they're going to move forward with you, whether you have that sales capabilities or you don't. I talk to a lot of business owners, Mike, all the time that say, I'm not the best salesperson. And I always have to remind them, you don't have to be the best salesperson in order for you to generate a lot of money for your business. First, you just have to solve a problem in exchange for their money, and people will buy from you if they like you, know you, and trust you. And that's really the case. I asked that one question to a Facebook group, and I said, like, how do you sell something that you don't know nothing about? You don't know the price, you don't know the product, you don't know the service. And it was a test. I wanted to see what they would say. And everybody was trying to give me advice on how they would close the deal or how I should close the deal. But the reality was, I was looking for the formula, and nobody could give me the formula. And I said it earlier already. You offer a solution in exchange for a problem, and that you get paid for it, and you make money off of it. You do that no matter if you're like selling. You have to not run fast, because when you run fast, that tells us two things. You're either trying to run away from something, and that creates also cautious. And you got to make sure you're speaking to them. Like if you're speaking to a friend at a restaurant, just having a beer with or having a glass of wine with, you do those things right, they will buy from you. And eventually you will build the book of business. And it just takes time. It's okay if you don't get it right the first time, the second time, or the third time. You just have to get that repetition. It's like tying a shoelace. It's like doing something for the first time, but you just got to keep going at it and keep building that repetition. I think a lot of times, Mike, and you see this happening, a lot of people start a recruitment business or they start something and they never finish. See, in my household, if we started something, we finished it. The only thing I ever not finished was playing baseball. And I ended up going through just being miserable for years. And I thought I was, probably the worst person, because I ended up giving up on a dream. But that ended up being the silver lining that I needed in order to catapult me into my next phase, because I knew I would never quit again. Sometimes, Mike, people have never quit, and sometimes people have quit. They're going to take this to the heart because they're self-disciplined, and they're not going to let this opportunity slide. For those who are, like, say, quitters, they're never going to win. And unfortunately, that it's something that they just, no matter what you put in front of them, it's never going to be enough for them. But I'll ask you this. When someone gets on these, like say, whether it's on a cold call or on a warm call, like, what is a warm call like to them? Like, let's say someone on a warm call, they go from a cold call now to a warm call, right? Because we've now had two interactions, gone to a warm call. How can you call to them? Because there's a difference here when we convert a cold call to a warm call. How do you go about handling that warm call so they could feel that, okay, this is not scary. You now know the person, you've spoken to them a couple times. How do you go about asking someone, how do you handle those nerves? Because I know for some, it could be still, overwhelming when someone's on a call and they're still fighting those pre-jitters.
Yeah, there's a lot in what you just said there, and I think that the warm calling element, I'm a big fan of that also. Where you can make the entry point into the conversation warmer. So there's two things I want to touch on. One is that, and the other is what you talked about, identifying the problem, which in classical sales training is called establishing a need, of course. So you're uncovering what the problem is. So the warm calling element first weighs into conversations. For example, taking a verbal reference on a candidate is a warm way into a client conversation, because you're not selling anything right away in that call. And then to develop the conversation through effective questioning and uncovering that they've had problems is so powerful. If done in the right way. Turning a candidate into a client is a warm call. And that is one of the ones I find people very rarely do effectively. There's a strategy that sits around that in recruitment. If it's a managerial candidate that I'm interviewing, I'm qualifying them whilst I'm interviewing them. And the key question I'm going to ask is something like, John, one of the key things that employers value in people at your level is the ability to build teams. Could you please tell me about the teams you've built over the years and how you went about doing that? And that's a really simple script, if you want to put it that way, but it hits the candidate who you're interviewing in a particular way, that there's a benefit to them of answering that question. Now, if I find out that that candidate come client, that if they say, oh, I hired 15 people last year, I've got 6 contractors. In the previous company, I hired 12 people. Then I would be a complete fool not to stay in touch with that person, regardless of whether I can place them or not. So these are some really simple ways to do, warmer conversations. Another one is client referrals, existing clients. I do a little exercise, Jace, with recruiters. And there was a game at school in the UK and, other parts of the world. Don't know if you know it, noughts and crosses. Do you know that game?
No. But when I go to UK, I'm gonna look it up.
Okay. All right. So it's kids' game at school. And you have, you draw lines down the page like this, and then a cross. So you end up with 9 boxes. So I say to recruiters, okay, draw the noughts and crosses like you did at school. And in the left-hand column, put the first name of your best 3 clients, not the companies, the individual names. Malcolm, Jenny, Dave. Okay. In the middle column, put the names of the companies where they used to work, not their current companies. And everybody struggles with it. They pick their pen up and they go, oh, these are their best clients. These are the people they've played golf with, they've been to the theater with, they've had a coffee with, they've had a sandwich with, they've had a beer with, and they know them. Now, let's say the big target company of that recruiter is called Big Target Company Inc. And their best client used to work at Big Target Company Inc. Then that's a door opener if you play your cards in the right way. So there's some training that sits around that to then develop that conversation, to turn it into a warmer call. And when I'm in inverted commas cold calling Big Target Company Inc., and they say, what's the call in connection with? I've been recommended to speak to him via Joe Blogs from IBM or whatever the company might be. So you've got those elements. So warmer calls can also be powerful. And then establishing a need, in that call, how do you uncover the problems? And, I call it this, Jace, I'm interested in your view. As a recruiter, when I go on a client meeting, for example, and in sales calls, that's a more refined skill in a sales call, but it's highly doable. I'm uncovering a trail of destruction left behind by the current supplier. That's the phrase that I use. And, the client who says, hey, I'm happy with my current suppliers, I'm going to ask some questions that reveal that actually they're not happy. And that enables me to then convert that into a meeting. An example might be, and you've got to contextualize this into the wider call, but just for speed. So typically, Mr. Client, out of every, say, 10 people you interview, how many of them are not right for your needs? 6 out of 10. All right. And just out of interest, how long does it take you to interview a candidate typically? About 45 minutes to an hour. Okay, so that's 5 to 6 hours of management time there. And what are the key reasons, the main reasons why they're not right? Personality fit, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to pull 4 or 5 problems just from that one question. And then I might say, now that we're chatting about that, how do your current suppliers help you to mitigate the risk of that time that you just described to me? And that's so powerful. Well, I don't really know. Well, this is what we do. How does that sound in comparison? Bang, and next thing you know, you're off and arranging a meeting. So, which kind of leads us on to objection handling. So my next question for you is, what's your philosophy in regard to objection handling? Are you into scripts? Are you into role play? What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, when I started, scripts were a great way to just stay on the beaten path. As you get more seasoned, you realize that role plays are really the key, because the more times you could hear yourself saying what you need to say, I'll never forget this experience. But when I was at Cardone, they would hire in small classes because they had a high turnover. and they would specifically just hire maybe in 2s, 3s, or mostly 4s. And I was part of one of their biggest classes where they only had 4 people they brought on, just 4, and that was a big class. But it was strategic. Everybody got, we each got paired up with what they called the cadet buddy. And I'll never forget this, Mike, when my director said, listen, Jace, Corey is responsible for calling you every other night that you're not calling him, but he's going to call you at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, and then 2 o'clock in the morning, and maybe 4 o'clock in the morning. And the goal there is that while you are drooling and you're dreaming, is for you to be able to handle every possible objection that he's going to throw at you, so you can be as natural as possible when you're conscious. So the trick there was to train my subconscious mind to say exactly what I needed to say. So by the time I was conscious, I knew everything verbatim and it didn't sound scripted. There's a fine line of what you cross and don't cross, and that was clearly one of those lines. But it taught me a lot, Mike, because when I got on the phone and I hear these sort of now I don't even consider them objections. I just hear them as complaints. It became so easy to maneuver any single conversation. I'm the type of person that if you throw say an objection at me, I just know what to tell you because I've been trained so well. Hey, I don't have the money. Yeah, I'm with you. Of course, you don't have. At the end of the day, this right here takes a whole and otherwise. I'm just making things up as I go, but it's the same process as a cold calling. So I've been telling my callers, if you could cold call, you'll know how to handle every single objection because it's the same rules apply. So all of a sudden, every single complaint that would come to me, I would handle it with grace. My conversion started going up higher. And that's when I knew, okay, I need to do something for myself because I've already been equipped with all the things. And I mean it, whether if you hear, let's be honest. What is a sales professional? Someone who can predict what's going to be told to them before it happens. So what are the most common objections, Mike, that you hear? Go ahead, shoot, tell me, throw something out at me.
I'm too busy to meet you at the moment.
Yeah, Mike, I'm with you. Of course, you're too busy to beat me at the moment. You're probably the most busiest person out there right now. And that tells me I'm talking to the right person because you probably have a billboard sign behind your office with your name and number, and you probably get a lot of traffic for this. But look, I don't want to take much of your time. All I want to propose is a 15-minute conversation where I can add an additional $50,000 to $100,000 to your bottom line every single month by adding the right person to your team. So tell me, Mike, when are you available? Earlier or later in the week?
Okay. Yeah, nice. So we've got internal recruiters.
Yeah, Mike, of course you have internal recruiters. And that also tells me that you are serious about getting the right person on board, but that you are also telling me that you're not allergic to adding more money to your plate, are you? By adding another external recruiter that could add more potential hires to your business that will allow you to increase your top revenue line, would you?
Yeah. The thing is, like you say, Jace, it's natural, isn't it? And going back to your comment from earlier, I was like, wow, that is hardcore. I've never come across that before, by the way, being called in the nighttime. That is seriously hardcore. So I'm trying to process how would I react to it if I was my younger self. But
you know what? And I'm sorry to cut you off, but there's a reason why they were hiring young, stupid kids that would follow directions because they knew that they needed to mold them exactly the way they needed. And that's what ended up happening. They ended up molding me to what I needed to become in order for me to evolve. Because when you're talking to these high-level business owners, let's be real, they're always going to be busy. They're never going to give you their time. But you also have to know how to talk to them as if you're one of their friends and you're just having a beer with them because they hate being pitched, but they love to buy. CEOs, they love to buy. They love to throw their Amex down, but they hate being pitched. They hate being sold. So it was finding that balance, and that training is what allowed me to propel myself to that next stage of my career. But at the end of the day, if you listen very closely to everything I'm telling you, right, what did I say the cold calling was from the beginning? The formula. You agree? You make right hook. If you listen to how to handle an objection, same thing over and over again. I could teach someone from the Philippines, from Latin America, you name it, from anywhere, how to handle a cold call. The only thing I need them to do is to have a good head on their shoulders, be coachable, put in the effort. And if they put those two things, then trust me, it doesn't matter where you're from. We have teams all over the world who are cold calling every single day, and U.S. clients don't even realize they're not even in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, that back to that rule of 100 again with objection handling. So it's if you hear the same objection over and over and over again, let's say 100 times, of course you're going to get better at it if you think about that, aren't you? I mean, I've been in London. I would travel home after a day on the phone, and in London, you're on the underground and you've got that wobbly thing that you hold on to because you can't get a seat. So I'm kind of standing and I'm listening to music, but I'm replaying a call in my head every evening on the way home. I just did it religiously. So I'm thinking, okay, I said X, the client said Y, I said Z. That's it. That's where it went wrong. So I started to, really coach myself and learn from that and come in and try different things rather than treating it as rejection, and so objections like I'm too busy to meet you, I'm closing very high percentages of that in the diary before the phone call ends. And I've done research on this at events. I've had 100, 200 people in an audience, recruiters. And I've said, when you hear the objection, I'm too busy to meet you, how many times out of 10 do you overcome the objection before the phone call ends, such that they've said, I'm too busy to meet you, but they still go in your diary before the phone call ends? And most of them don't. And I've listened to calls and, the week ending is something like, oh, no, I appreciate that. So shall I call you back in a month? And you're going to get the client saying, well, thanks for the offer, but I've got your number. I'll call you if I need you. And then they fail and then don't know how to overcome it. And I know you're a big fan of meetings. So am I, by the way. I think it's the absolute key to business development. It's get in front of people, and then you've got more time to uncover more problems and more issues, and also pull out what I call the vacancy in the cupboard. The employer who tells you they're not hiring, and then you get the meeting, and then it's, oh, well, actually, I do have a vacancy coming up in the next month or two. And there are other techniques, as you know, in that meeting, which can lead to a hidden vacancy. I mean, I was coaching a guy close to where I live now, and this is very recent. And I taught him a technique called the replacement hire. And the replacement hire is essentially identifying on a meeting that they've got an underperformer. Now, he he places senior level candidates, and he told me that from that meeting he picked up a requirement from a customer that's not hiring. So these techniques work. Now, they don't work every time. No sales technique does. But to your point from earlier, become a student, master it. And objection handling for me is two or three things. Firstly, write down the objections, and there actually aren't that many of them. There's probably 10 core ones. Write them down.
I wanted to ask, is this your philosophy when it comes to objection handling right here that you're sharing with us?
It's part of it, yeah. I think objection handling isn't as simple as, the client says X and you say Y, but there's elements of that, because there's also establishing the need. Which is key questioning. But if you write down the objections and you understand them, and then you start to think, what do I normally say when the client says X? And then is that powerful enough? And how can I make it more powerful? How can I make it more engaging? So there's an element of thinking about it, but then there's an element of trying it, taking the risk and having a go, and just being prepared to fail, but making it natural, as you said, Jace. I'm a massive believer in that, and that links into role play. So if you've got your 10 core objections, and then you role play with colleagues and you practice. I mean, in my business, I had people in the office do an internal phone call very early in the morning without, if you're my colleague and you sit at the other end of the office, I don't ring you and say, hey, Jace, can I do a role play? I ring you and ring, hello, Mike Walmsley, and I'm straight into the into the call, and you know that because you're my buddy, and therefore you role play with me. And for me, the biggest thing about role play isn't just practice. It's the food of champions, and the food of champions is feedback. So you don't get feedback from, a phone call where, look, I'm just not interested. Where's your feedback from that? Now that's a real-time call and it went wrong, okay? But in a role player with a colleague who says, hey, Mike, I really liked X and Y and Z in that call, but I think you missed an opportunity, and this is the opportunity you missed. If you'd asked me this question, I would have told you X. Or I thought you were a bit too pushy. I thought you weren't assertive enough. So if you get a buddy who is an adept giver and receiver of feedback, you really can improve just by doing it with a friend. What's your view on that?
It goes both ways, because you got to also be careful, right? One thing I learned quite early was you back from someone that's not more senior than you when it comes to this process, who doesn't have much more success than you, because they could also misrail you in the wrong direction too, right? It's like a train. When you're going in one direction, it has the different tracks, and all of a sudden that person unwillingly may just pull the wrong track on you, and you may go in a different direction. And it's super important that if you're going to take advice from someone, have advice from someone who is a little bit more senior, who has success, because it could easily misguide you and derail you. When it comes to like this whole process, whether if it's cold calling, whether if it's objection handling, there's a way of doing it that works. And the way I may do it may not be the most effective way. I've seen, Mike, the most unorthodox way of closing deals, where someone picks up the phone, they start slamming it, all of us, they pretend they can't hear them, and the guy closes the deal. Like it's like a whole movie of a roller coaster. They cry, they pray, they laugh, they get mad at each other, and then the deal gets closed, and you're wondering, how the hell did that just happen? And I've seen it right in front of my eyes. So if you are going to learn, just make sure you're learning from someone who has like the tenure, the success that they have, because at the end of the day, like you said, right, you want to be breeding champions when it comes to this, and you want to make sure you're getting your information from the right source. That's really why over the past few years, I've been so closely just developing some sort of training academy just to teach people this, because I do feel in a way it's a lost art. Not that many people know how to do it. Not that many people want to do it. And it's not maybe they don't want to do it. They just don't know where to go to get the right information. And me and my buddy Mike, we just said, you know what, which is funny. We just said, you know what, let's just teach others. And we started hosting like these audio rooms. We started getting the recordings. People started coming live with us, and we start playing around, role playing with them, giving them the concise feedback. And they would tell us the next week, hey, it's working. Of course it's working. We know it works because we've gone through it. We know what you're going to go through. So as long as you're getting that information from the right source, that's ultimately what matters. And that's what kind of gets me excited about what I've been building on the side here, just to start teaching others how to actually cold call.
Yeah. And again, be yourself and trust yourself, and be natural. And if something feels wrong from, a bit of feedback, don't fight the feedback, because the coach won't give you feedback anymore if you keep fighting it. But, if they give me 3 bits of feedback, A, B, and C, and usually I'm using A and B, I never say that. I don't say, well, I normally do A and B, but. I just say thank you. Just say thank you and move on, and take the thing that's valuable. But, to your point again there about unorthodox, it just made me smile, because I coached a recruiter once. He told me this story of he couldn't get through to this particular target client. He just couldn't get through. So he tried something different, and he sent them a bag of jelly babies. Do you know jelly babies?
Yeah.
He sent them a bag of jelly babies in the post, and then he sent, a week later, he sent another bag of jelly babies addressed to the person with not much information in there, no corporate heading or anything. And then he sent another bag of jelly babies. And then he rang through to the target company, and the receptionist said, what's the call in connection with? And he said, I'm the secret jelly baby sender. And she cracked up laughing, put him through, So how do you teach that? It's orthodox. And, another one which is not sales related, but similar, showing how you can be unorthodox to do things, was one of my protege, a guy called Uzi, fantastic recruiter. I learned from him after a while. I had to really be on my mettle to stay ahead of him. And he's trying to arrange an interview without sending a CV, because we always tried to convince the client to see our candidate before we even sent the CV. We called it a verbal interview, wherever we possibly could. And of course, we were confident that the person was right, otherwise we wouldn't do that. So so he's on the phone to this person called Ashok in the days when people had checkbooks. And he says, "Hey, Ashok, it's Uzi here. How are you?" He said, "Yeah, I'm good, thanks." He said, "Do you have your checkbook handy?" He said, "Why do I need my checkbook?" He said, "I'd like you to write a check out to Parker Bridge for £15,200. He said, "Why on earth would I do that?" "Well, I've got the candidate for you, and that's going to be the fee, unfortunately, but it's going to be worth it." And he cracked up laughing, got the interview straight away. So, you've got to just try things, and that was his natural style. That wasn't my style, by the way, but it just illustrates the point. Have fun. I think telesales should be fun, shouldn't it? And I wholeheartedly 1,000,000% agree with you that for a lot of people it's a lost art. And I'm seeing quite a bit of stuff on LinkedIn now, in addition to yours, where people are talking about getting back on the phone, talking to people, engaging with them. It's always been that way. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. I think what you're doing is a breath of fresh air. I'd love to hear more about your sales academy. If anyone watching this show today wants to reach out and find out more about that, Jace, where should they go?
Yeah, they could DM me. We're keeping everything very tight knit until we launch. It's going to be something special. It's something that we've been in the makings for quite some time now. And it's even going to be talking about just outside the box thinking, like you were talking about here, of how Uzi was getting in front of the right person, right? We're going to be telling you a lot about how to follow up in a creative way that you've probably never thought about. So DM me, we'll get in contact with them, and then we're going to officially launch. We're getting with our developers next Monday. And like I said, we're building a whole community for it. It's going to be a lot of fun. So they could DM me, and we'll definitely let them know what the next steps look like.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for joining me so late in your day. Have a good rest of your evening, and I really look forward to joining you next time.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for having me. Appreciate your time, and let's do this again sometime.